Imagine taking a truck that was originally designed to carry serious weight, survive hard work, and keep moving when ordinary vehicles have already given up, then pushing that idea to an entirely different level. What if that workhorse became a full-scale expedition machine? A truck capable of carrying fuel, water, tools, recovery equipment, camping gear, spare parts, and everything else you might need when the nearest road disappears behind you. That is the idea behind the adventure-focused Ranger concept we're looking at today. This isn't simply a pickup with bigger tires and a few extra accessories. The vision is much more ambitious. It takes the toughness associated with a medium-duty work truck and combines it with the equipment and attitude of an extreme overland vehicle. Picture a massive truck sitting at the edge of a desert trail. The suspension is raised, the tires are enormous. Protective metalwork surrounds the body, recovery equipment is mounted where it can be reached instantly. Behind the cab is not just an ordinary cargo bed, but a carefully organized expedition platform. And suddenly, a vehicle created for work begins to look like something designed for disappearing into the wilderness. Before we go any further, there's one important point to make. This is a concept-style vision rather than a confirmed production specification. Some of the equipment, performance ideas, and configurations we're discussing represent what could be achieved through an extreme build rather than a standard factory vehicle. But that is exactly what makes the idea interesting. Because when you start with a truck built around durability, payload, and toughness, there's an enormous amount of potential waiting to be unlocked. So let's start at the front, because the transformation becomes obvious the moment you see it. The front end is where an ordinary work truck would normally communicate practicality. But on an expedition build, everything changes. The grille becomes larger, more aggressive, and more imposing. Instead of looking like a vehicle designed primarily for construction sites or commercial transport, the truck now has the visual presence of something built to confront difficult terrain. The headlights are another major part of the transformation. Modern LED lighting could be integrated into the front design to provide stronger illumination during nighttime driving. Additional light bars could sit higher on the vehicle, helping illuminate distant sections of a trail. And when you're traveling through remote territory, lighting isn't simply about making the truck look impressive. It can become part of the vehicle's survival equipment. A dark trail can hide rocks, deep ruts, fallen branches, water crossings, and sudden changes in elevation. Being able to see those obstacles early can make a major difference, but the front end needs more than lighting. It needs protection. That is why an extreme adventure build would require a heavy-duty front bumper designed to deal with impacts that would be completely unacceptable for an ordinary road-going pickup. Think about a narrow trail through a forest. Branches are scraping against the body, rocks are sticking out from the ground. The truck is moving slowly because there is barely enough room to choose a clean line. Then the terrain changes. A steep section appears ahead. The front wheels climb upward, the suspension compresses and extends, and the bumper suddenly becomes one of the most exposed parts of the vehicle. This is where serious off-road engineering matters. A properly designed bumper could provide additional clearance while creating mounting points for recovery equipment, auxiliary lighting, and protective components. Heavy-duty recovery points would also be essential, because an expedition vehicle isn't built around the assumption that everything will always go according to plan. Eventually, something may go wrong. A wheel could sink into soft mud. The truck could become stuck in sand. A steep climb could prove too difficult, or a hidden obstacle could force the vehicle into an awkward position. When that happens, recovery points become critical. A winch mounted at the front could provide another layer of self-recovery capability, allowing the truck to potentially pull itself out of difficult situations when suitable anchor points are available. And that changes the philosophy of the vehicle. You're no longer simply driving an off-road truck. You're carrying the equipment necessary to recover an off-road truck. That distinction is extremely important for long-distance expeditions. Then there is the underside. One of the biggest mistakes with an extreme off-road vehicle is protecting everything you can see while ignoring everything underneath. A truck may have aggressive tires, impressive suspension, and a powerful engine, but if a rock destroys a vulnerable component underneath, the adventure can end immediately. That is why an expedition build would need serious skid protection. Heavy-duty plates could protect vulnerable mechanical components from rocks and other obstacles. The goal isn't necessarily to make the truck impossible to damage. Nothing is. The goal is to make the vehicle better prepared for the kinds of impacts that are unavoidable when traveling beyond maintained roads. And then we reach one of the most visually dramatic elements of the build, the tires. The standard road-oriented tire has one job. The tire on an extreme expedition truck has many. It needs to generate traction in mud. It needs to remain stable over rocks. It needs to float through loose sand. It needs to perform in snow. And it needs to survive thousands of kilometers of unpredictable terrain. That means large all-terrain or specialized off-road tires become one of the defining features of the vehicle. Their size alone changes the personality of the truck. Larger tires can increase ground clearance and help the vehicle roll over obstacles that would otherwise stop a smaller truck. But tire size also introduces new engineering challenges. more weight, more rotational mass. Potentially greater stress on suspension components, axles, brakes, and steering systems. So this isn't simply a case of installing the biggest tire that fits. The entire truck has to be considered as a system. The suspension would need to be upgraded accordingly. A raised suspension could provide additional clearance underneath the vehicle, while allowing greater wheel travel over uneven terrain. And wheel travel is one of those things that doesn't always look impressive in a specification sheet, but becomes incredibly important on a trail. Imagine the truck approaching a rocky climb. One wheel rises over a large obstacle, while the opposite wheel drops into a depression. A suspension system with good articulation helps keep the tires connected with the ground. That connection is what produces traction, and traction is ultimately what moves the truck forward. The fenders would also require attention. Large tires can extend beyond the standard bodywork, so wider fender protection could help keep mud, rocks, and debris from being thrown across the vehicle. But the visual result is equally important. The truck begins to look wider, taller, and more purposeful. The hood can receive a more muscular design, perhaps with additional ventilation or raised detailing that emphasizes the heavy-duty character. And when all these elements come together, grille, bumper, lighting, skid plates, recovery equipment, tires, suspension, and fender protection, the transformation becomes dramatic. This is no longer a truck that simply looks ready for an adventure. It looks like a truck that was built around the idea of adventure. But the exterior is only half of the story. Because once you've driven several hundred kilometers away from civilization, the inside of the truck becomes just as important as what is happening underneath it. An expedition vehicle has to function as a mobile command center. You might spend hours behind the wheel. You may be navigating unfamiliar terrain. You may need to monitor fuel consumption, engine temperature, tire pressures, altitude, weather, and route information. And you need all of that information without turning the cabin into a confusing collection of screens and switches. That's where a modernized interior becomes valuable. A large digital instrument display could place critical driving information directly in front of the driver. Speed, engine data, navigation information, drive modes, and other vehicle parameters could all be displayed in a format that's easy to understand. Then there is the central infotainment system. A large touchscreen could provide navigation, communication, media, vehicle settings, and potentially off-road information. But for an expedition vehicle, navigation is particularly important. You aren't always going to have a clearly marked road. Sometimes, the path may be nothing more than a trail visible on a digital map. Sometimes, you may be following coordinates rather than street names. And sometimes, you may need to navigate back the way you came. That is why a serious expedition build could benefit from advanced navigation systems designed for off-road travel. Offline mapping would be especially valuable, because when you're deep in a remote region, cellular coverage can disappear. And when the signal disappears, a navigation system that depends entirely on an online connection suddenly becomes much less useful. A proper expedition setup would therefore ideally include multiple layers of navigation and communication. Digital mapping, offline maps, GPS positioning, two-way communication, and potentially satellite-based communication equipment for truly remote travel. This is where the concept starts to feel less like a traditional pickup and more like a mobile expedition headquarters. But technology isn't everything. The seats matter. A driver spending 8 or 10 hours on rough terrain needs proper support and comfort. A passenger needs it too. Premium materials could give the cabin a more upscale atmosphere, while durable surfaces would be better suited to the reality of an adventure vehicle. Leather or rugged synthetic upholstery, reinforced stitching, rubberized flooring, and easy-to-clean materials could all make sense. Because unlike a luxury road car, this truck is expected to get dirty. Very dirty. Mud can enter through open doors, dust can cover everything, water can splash into the cabin. And equipment brought back from an outdoor adventure isn't always clean. That means practicality has to be built into the interior. Additional storage compartments could be placed throughout the cabin. Tools need a home. Recovery straps need a home. Flashlights, communication equipment, cameras, maps, food, personal gear, and emergency supplies all need somewhere to go. A well-designed expedition interior doesn't just give you more storage. It makes the storage organized. That difference matters when you're trying to find something quickly. Imagine getting stuck after sunset. You need a recovery strap. If it's buried underneath 5 bags and several boxes, the situation becomes frustrating. But if the vehicle has dedicated storage locations, you know exactly where the equipment is. That is the kind of detail that separates an adventure-themed truck from a genuinely useful expedition machine. And then there's the rear of the vehicle. This is where the concept becomes especially interesting. Because instead of treating the rear cargo area as a simple pickup bed, an expedition build can transform it into an entire operational platform. Think modular storage, large weather-resistant boxes, fuel containers, water tanks, recovery gear, tools, spare parts, camping equipment, food supplies, electrical equipment. Everything can be organized around one basic principle. Carry what you need without turning the truck into an uncontrollable pile of equipment. A reinforced flatbed or custom rear module could provide a much stronger foundation for this type of setup. Instead of simply throwing cargo into an open bed, the vehicle could have dedicated compartments for different categories of equipment. One section could hold recovery gear, another could store tools, another could carry water, another could contain fuel, and another could provide space for outdoor cooking or camping equipment. The possibilities become almost endless. But there's another feature that takes this idea even further: a camper or expedition module. Now imagine arriving at a remote location after driving all day. The road ends. There's nothing around you except mountains, desert, forest, or open wilderness. Instead of setting up a completely separate tent system every night, the truck itself becomes your base. A custom module mounted behind the cab could provide sleeping space, storage, cooking equipment, and additional living facilities. Suddenly, the truck isn't just transporting your adventure, it is part of the adventure. You could wake up inside the vehicle, step outside, prepare breakfast, inspect the truck, pack your equipment, and continue deeper into the wilderness. And that changes the entire use case. A normal pickup is designed to take you somewhere. An expedition truck is designed to let you stay there. The rear section could also include external lighting. This might sound like a small detail, but once the sun goes down in a remote environment, external lighting becomes incredibly useful. You may need to inspect a tire. You may need to unload equipment. You may need to repair something. You may simply need to prepare a meal outside. Integrated lighting around the rear module could turn the area into a functional nighttime workspace. And that brings us to one of the most important considerations of all: self-sufficiency. The farther you travel from civilization, the less you can depend on outside assistance. That means the truck needs to carry more of its own resources. Fuel is obvious. Water is even more important. A properly equipped expedition truck could carry additional water storage integrated into the rear. Additional fuel storage could extend the truck's range as well. The water might be used for drinking, storage must always be cleaning or emergency purposes. Because once you're hundreds of kilometers away from the nearest fuel station, range anxiety takes on an entirely different meaning. It's not about whether you can reach the next station. There may not be another station. That's why long-range expedition vehicles are built around redundancy: spare tires, extra tools, recovery equipment, emergency communication, additional fluids, repair materials, navigation backups, and enough supplies to handle unexpected delays. Because the biggest enemy in remote travel isn't always the terrain. Sometimes it's a small mechanical problem that happens at the worst possible location. A puncture, a damaged hose, a failed electrical component, a broken recovery strap, a dead battery. Individually, these might be manageable problems. In a city, they could be solved quickly. In the wilderness, they could become major obstacles. That's why the concept of this Ranger Adventure build is so compelling. It takes a vehicle already associated with durability and turns that durability into the foundation of a much larger system. And underneath all the equipment is the powertrain. This is where the difference between an ordinary adventure pickup and a true heavy-duty expedition machine becomes even clearer. The ideal configuration would focus less on headline horsepower and more on torque, durability, controllability, and reliability. A powerful diesel engine would make sense for this kind of application because torque is extremely valuable when you're moving a heavily loaded vehicle across difficult terrain. Imagine the truck climbing a steep rocky trail with thousands of kilograms of vehicle, equipment, fuel, water, and passengers. You don't necessarily need the engine to scream at high RPM. You need strong, controlled power delivered when you need it. Low-end torque becomes incredibly important. It helps the truck crawl through difficult sections. It helps maintain momentum in deep sand. It helps when climbing. And it helps when the vehicle is heavily loaded. But engine power alone doesn't create an expedition vehicle. That power has to reach the ground effectively. This is where a serious four-wheel drive system becomes essential. A sophisticated four-wheel drive setup could allow the driver to adapt the vehicle to different surfaces and conditions: mud, sand, rock, snow, loose gravel, steep inclines. Each environment creates a different traction problem. In sand, you may want smooth and consistent power delivery. In rocks, precise low-speed control becomes more important. In mud, maintaining momentum can be critical. And on snow, minimizing wheel spin becomes a major challenge. Selectable terrain modes could help the driver adjust the truck's behavior to match the environment. But experienced off-road drivers know that electronics are only part of the equation. Mechanical hardware still matters. Locking differentials could be extremely useful. When one wheel loses traction, a locking differential can help distribute power in a way that keeps the vehicle moving. And when the terrain becomes truly difficult, that can be the difference between climbing the obstacle and stopping halfway up. Specialized off-road gearing would also help. The ability to move slowly while maintaining control is essential in technical terrain. You don't always want speed. Sometimes you want the truck to move at walking pace while the driver carefully chooses each wheel placement. That is where low-range gearing becomes invaluable. And then there are the axles. An expedition truck carrying heavy equipment over extreme terrain places enormous demands on its drivetrain. Reinforced axles and heavy-duty components would therefore be a logical part of a serious build. The same goes for the brakes. A heavier vehicle carrying additional cargo has more mass to control. That means braking performance becomes increasingly important, especially when descending steep mountain roads, especially when the truck is fully loaded, and especially when the terrain is loose or unpredictable. An adventure vehicle cannot simply be powerful. It must be controllable, it must be predictable, and most importantly, it must remain reliable after repeated abuse. That is the real test. Not whether it can conquer one dramatic obstacle for a promotional video, but whether it can do it again tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and after thousands of kilometers. That is what makes the expedition philosophy different. The goal isn't simply maximum capability, it's usable capability. A truck that can travel deep into remote terrain and still have enough durability to bring its occupants home. That is the standard a vehicle like this would have to meet. And once you start thinking about that, even something as simple as ground clearance becomes more important. Higher clearance means fewer components are exposed to rocks and obstacles, but too much height can also affect stability. So the suspension setup has to balance clearance, articulation, load capacity, and road manners. This is where engineering becomes more important than appearance. Anyone can make a truck look aggressive. A serious expedition build has to make the truck work. And that means every modification has a consequence. Bigger tires affect gearing. A heavier bumper affects weight. A roof rack affects the center of gravity. Additional fuel and water affect payload. A camper module adds more mass. More mass changes braking. More weight changes suspension requirements. Everything connects. That's why a truly capable adventure truck isn't simply a collection of accessories. It's an integrated machine. And that brings us back to the original idea. Take a dependable workhorse, give it the protection it needs, give it the suspension and tires required for serious terrain, give it the drivetrain capability to handle difficult surfaces, give it enough storage to carry the essentials, give it communication and navigation equipment, and give it a living module capable of supporting people far from civilization. The result is something completely different. It becomes a machine built around independence, a machine that doesn't need a road to define where it can go. And perhaps that's the most fascinating part of this entire concept, because modern trucks are often judged by horsepower, towing numbers, screens, luxury features, and acceleration. But an expedition truck is judged by a different set of questions. Can it carry enough? Can it go far enough? Can it recover itself? Can it survive the terrain? Can the occupants stay safe and comfortable? And when something goes wrong, does the vehicle have the equipment and durability to keep going? Those questions reveal what this concept is really about. It's not about creating the fastest truck. It's about creating one that can go places most trucks never will. Picture it again. The sun is rising over a mountain range. The truck is parked on a narrow plateau overlooking a huge valley. There are no buildings, no traffic, no fuel stations, no city noise, just wind, rock, and open space. The vehicle carries everything needed for the next stage of the journey. Fuel, water, food, tools, recovery equipment, camping gear, navigation equipment, spare parts, and enough capability to continue when the road disappears. That is the promise of an extreme Ranger adventure build. Not luxury for the sake of luxury, not aggression for the sake of appearance, but capability with a purpose. And in part 2, we'll take this concept even further, looking at how the expedition setup could be optimized for long-distance travel, what happens when the terrain becomes truly extreme, how the living and cargo systems could work together, and why a truck like this could become one of the most fascinating forms of adventure vehicle imaginable. Because turning a workhorse into an off-road monster is one thing. Turning it into a machine capable of supporting an entire expedition is something else entirely. Now imagine the journey has already begun. The truck has left the pavement behind, the last signs of civilization are disappearing in the rearview mirror, and the terrain ahead is becoming more unpredictable with every kilometer. This is where the real purpose of an expedition truck begins to reveal itself. On ordinary roads, almost any capable pickup can feel impressive. But once the surface changes from asphalt to loose gravel, then to sand, rocks, mud, and steep climbs, the vehicle has to prove that all those modifications actually mean something. And for a machine like this, the objective isn't simply to survive one difficult section. The objective is to keep moving for days, potentially weeks, while carrying everything required for the journey. That changes the way the entire truck has to be designed. Consider weight distribution. When you add a camper module, water tanks, fuel, tools, recovery equipment, spare tires, food, batteries, and personal luggage, the truck becomes dramatically heavier than its original configuration. That additional weight can't simply be placed wherever there is empty space. It has to be distributed intelligently. Heavy equipment should be positioned as low as practical and close to the vehicle's center to help maintain stability. Water and fuel storage need to be securely mounted. Storage compartments have to protect equipment from dust and moisture. And the rear suspension has to be capable of supporting the load without destroying the truck's ability to handle rough terrain. This is where an adventure build stops being about appearance and becomes a genuine engineering exercise, because the truck doesn't just have to carry the equipment. It has to carry it while moving over terrain that constantly tries to throw that equipment in every direction. Imagine crossing a rocky trail. The left side of the vehicle climbs over a large rock while the right side drops into a deep depression. The chassis twists. The suspension works independently at each corner. Inside the cabin, every unsecured object wants to move. Outside, every storage box is being subjected to vibration. Every mounting point is experiencing stress. This is why expedition-grade construction has to be substantially more robust than ordinary camping equipment. The storage system needs to remain secure after hundreds of kilometers of vibration. Doors and latches need to remain functional even when covered in dust. Electrical connections need protection from water and debris. And the living module has to remain comfortable enough to use after a full day of rough driving. That last point is easy to underestimate. Off-road travel can be exhausting. Even when the vehicle is moving slowly, the constant movement places demands on the driver and passengers. A properly designed suspension can help absorb those impacts, but it also has to remain controlled. Too soft, and a heavily loaded truck could become unstable. Too stiff, and every bump gets transferred directly into the cabin. The ideal setup would need to balance comfort, durability, articulation, and load capacity. Adjustable suspension technology could potentially make that balance easier. On pavement, the truck could use one setup. On rough terrain, another. And under heavy loads, the suspension could be adjusted accordingly, but even the best suspension can't eliminate every obstacle. Eventually, the truck is going to encounter terrain where technique matters more than equipment. Take a steep rocky climb. The driver approaches slowly. The wheels begin climbing over uneven surfaces. The truck's weight shifts backward. The engine delivers controlled torque. The four-wheel drive system works to maintain traction. The differential locks engage where necessary. And the driver carefully chooses a line that keeps the vehicle balanced. This is where the combination of mechanical capability and driver skill becomes incredibly important. A sophisticated truck can give you more options. It cannot make every decision for you, and that is part of what makes serious off-roading so rewarding. The vehicle and the driver become a team. The truck provides strength, the driver provides judgment. Together, they determine how far the journey can go. Now consider sand. Desert terrain creates an entirely different challenge. On hard ground, the tires can generate traction relatively easily. On loose sand, the surface constantly shifts beneath them. Too much wheel spin can quickly dig the tires deeper. Too little momentum can cause the truck to bog down. This is where tire selection, tire pressure, throttle control, and driving technique become extremely important. An expedition truck designed for desert travel could benefit from tires capable of generating a large contact patch. Reducing tire pressure when appropriate can allow the tire to spread across the surface and improve flotation, but lower pressure also increases the risk of tire damage if the vehicle encounters sharp rocks. Again, there's no single perfect setting. The driver has to understand the terrain, and the truck has to provide enough flexibility to adapt. That same philosophy applies to mud. Mud is unpredictable. The surface can look firm and turn into a deep trap only a few meters later. Aggressive tread patterns can help clear mud from the tire. Locking differentials can help maintain forward movement, and controlled throttle application can prevent unnecessary wheel spin. But sometimes, despite all the technology and experience, the truck still gets stuck. That is when recovery equipment becomes the hero. A heavy-duty winch can provide a lifeline. Recovery boards can help create a firmer surface under the tires. Tow straps and shackles can connect the vehicle to another recovery point. A high-lift jack or suitable lifting system can assist with certain types of recovery, and a shovel may become one of the most valuable pieces of equipment on the entire truck. Because when you are deep in the wilderness, simple tools can become incredibly important. The expedition truck should therefore be thought of as a system with multiple layers of protection. First, prevent getting stuck. Second, maintain traction. Third, recover yourself if necessary. And fourth, carry enough equipment to repair the vehicle if something breaks. That fourth layer is where long-distance travel becomes particularly serious. When you're close to civilization, a mechanical problem is an inconvenience. When you're far away, it can become a logistical crisis. That's why a serious expedition build could carry spare belts, hoses, fuses, electrical components, tire repair equipment, compressors, tools, fluids, and other mission-critical supplies. You don't need to carry an entire workshop, but you do need enough equipment to handle the problems most likely to occur, and that requires knowing the vehicle. The best expedition drivers aren't simply people who own expensive off-road trucks. They're people who understand how their machines work. They know where the recovery points are. They know how to check tire pressure. They know how to inspect suspension components. They know how to monitor engine temperatures. They know how to identify unusual sounds. And they know when to stop before a small problem becomes a major failure. That mindset could be just as important as the truck itself. Now let's move back to the rear, because the expedition module can become one of the most fascinating parts of the entire concept. Imagine opening the rear compartment. Instead of seeing random bags and loose equipment, everything has a designated place. One cabinet contains cooking equipment. Another holds tools. A dedicated compartment stores recovery equipment. There's a water system. There may be an auxiliary electrical system. And inside the living area, there is a compact sleeping space. The design doesn't need to feel enormous. It simply needs to use space intelligently. That's one of the greatest advantages of building an expedition vehicle around a truck platform. You can create a compact but highly functional environment. A sleeping platform can fold or transform depending on how much space is required. Storage can be integrated underneath. A small cooking area could provide a place to prepare food. Ventilation could keep the interior comfortable. And insulated materials could help control temperature in extreme environments. Because the environment is another major challenge. A truck traveling through a desert faces intense heat during the day and potentially surprisingly cold temperatures at night. A truck traveling through mountains may encounter freezing temperatures, snow, and rapidly changing weather. A forest expedition may involve rain, mud, and high humidity. So the camper module needs to be designed for more than one climate. Insulation, ventilation, water resistance, and reliable electrical systems all become important. And then there's power. Modern expedition vehicles can require a surprising amount of electricity. Lighting, navigation, communication, cameras, phones, laptops, refrigeration, water pumps, auxiliary equipment. All of these systems consume energy. That means an auxiliary battery system could be extremely useful. Depending on the configuration, solar panels could potentially supplement the electrical system during longer stays. The goal would be to reduce dependence on external charging. Again, the underlying philosophy is self-sufficiency. You want the truck to be capable of staying away from civilization for as long as practical. And that brings us to communication. For ordinary road trips, a smartphone is usually enough, but deep wilderness travel changes the rules. There may be no cellular signal, no nearby tower, no easy way to call for assistance. That is why advanced communication equipment can become a critical part of an expedition setup. Two-way radios can help vehicles communicate with one another. Satellite-based communication can potentially provide another layer of connectivity in remote regions. And emergency signaling equipment can provide an additional safety measure. The more isolated the journey, the more important redundancy becomes. You don't want one broken device to eliminate your ability to communicate. You want multiple options. This is the same philosophy used throughout the vehicle. One spare tire may be enough for a normal trip. For an expedition, carrying more than one may make sense depending on the route. One navigation device is useful. A backup is better. One recovery method is good. Several options are better. The goal is not to prepare for every imaginable disaster. That's impossible. The goal is to reduce the number of single points of failure. Now imagine the truck approaching a mountain pass. The road is narrow. One side is a rock wall. The other side drops toward a distant valley. There are no guardrails. The surface is covered with loose stones. This is where the vehicle's dimensions become important. A massive truck may have incredible capability, but size can become a disadvantage on narrow trails, and perhaps a spare tire mounted where it can be accessed quickly. The vehicle would look enormous. But more importantly, every visible element would tell a story. The tires say traction. The bumper says protection. The winch says recovery. The storage system says endurance. The camper module says independence. The communication equipment says isolation. And the suspension says terrain. That's what makes a great adventure vehicle visually powerful. It doesn't need excessive decoration. Its equipment communicates its purpose. But beneath all the visual drama, reliability remains the most important factor. Imagine being 2 weeks into an expedition. The truck has already traveled across hundreds of kilometers of dirt roads. It has climbed mountains, crossed rivers, moved through mud, driven through sand, and carried a huge amount of equipment. At that point, the most impressive feature isn't the touchscreen. It isn't the light bar. It isn't the body kit. It's the fact that the engine starts every morning, that the transmission works, that the suspension remains strong, that the tires still have usable tread, that the electrical system continues operating, and that the vehicle still has enough range to get you home. That's what durability really means. Not simply surviving a dramatic moment, but continuing to function after repeated punishment. And if an adventure truck could achieve that, it would become much more than a modified pickup. It would become a trusted partner, the kind of vehicle you depend on when the environment becomes unpredictable. The kind of machine where you know that when the trail gets worse, the truck doesn't immediately become a liability. Instead, it gives you confidence to continue. Of course, no vehicle can make nature harmless. There will always be limits. A river can become too deep. A rock section can become too dangerous. A storm can make a trail impassable. A mountain pass can close. And sometimes, the smartest decision is to turn around. That is an important part of responsible adventure travel. Capability should create confidence, not overconfidence. The The best expedition vehicle isn't the one that makes you believe you're invincible. It's the one that gives you enough capability and preparation to make better decisions. And that's ultimately why this Ranger Adventure concept is so fascinating. It represents a different way of thinking about what a truck can be. A work truck doesn't have to remain a work truck. With the right engineering, it can become a long-range explorer. It can become a mobile workshop, a campsite, a recovery vehicle, a command center, a transport platform, and a home away from home. The possibilities are limited mainly by how far you are willing to take the concept. And perhaps the most interesting question is not whether someone could build a truck like this. They could. The more interesting question is where you would take it. Would you drive across the deserts of North Africa? Would you take it into the mountains? Would you cross remote forest trails? Would you explore the vast landscapes of Australia? Would you take it across long stretches of wilderness where the nearest town is hundreds of kilometers away? Or would you simply use it for weekend adventures, camping far away from crowded tourist destinations? That's the beauty of the concept. The same vehicle could serve completely different lifestyles. For one owner, it could be a serious expedition platform. For another, a luxury camping machine. For someone else, a specialized off-road support vehicle. And for an automotive enthusiast, it could simply be the ultimate expression of what a tough truck can become. But there is one final thing that makes this concept especially interesting. The adventure isn't really about the truck. The truck is the tool. The real attraction is the freedom it represents. The ability to leave the normal route, to explore places that aren't surrounded by parking lots and hotels, to wake up somewhere that doesn't have a street address, to travel beyond the familiar. And when the vehicle is designed properly, it gives you the confidence to do that. Imagine shutting down the engine after a long day. The truck is covered in dust. The tires are dirty. The suspension has been working for hours. The equipment has been used. The fuel level has dropped. But the vehicle is parked safely at a remote campsite. You step outside. There are no traffic lights, no city sounds, no crowds, just the landscape around you. And tomorrow morning, you know the truck can start again and continue the journey. That is what an expedition machine should deliver.